Snow White once upon a time, in a great kingdom nestled between snow-capped mountains and dark whispering forests, there lived a queen who was as kind as the winter was cold. One frosty evening, she sat by her ebony-framed window, sewing by candlelight. Sewing by candlelight. Outside, snowflakes drifted down like tiny feathers from the sky. As she watched the snow fall, she accidentally pricked her finger with her needle. 3 drops of blood fell, red as a rose, onto the white snow on the windowsill. She gazed at those 3 drops and whispered softly to herself, "How I wish for a child with lips as red as blood, skin as white as snow, and hair as black as the ebony of this window frame." Not long after, her wish came true. She gave birth to a beautiful baby girl with exactly those features: lips red as blood, skin white as snow, and hair black as ebony. The queen named her Snow White. But happiness, as it sometimes does, came at a terrible price. The queen fell gravely ill, and before the first flowers of spring could bloom, she passed away quietly, leaving behind her beloved little daughter. The king, lost in his grief, eventually remarried. His new wife was a woman of stunning beauty, tall, cold-eyed, and magnificently dressed at all times. She wore jewels at her throat and pride in her heart. But beneath her gorgeous exterior lived a dark and terrible vanity. She possessed a magic mirror, an oval-looking glass framed in gold that hung upon her chamber wall. This every morning, without fail, she would stand before it and ask, "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" And every morning the mirror would reply, "You, my queen, are the fairest in the land." This answer pleased her deeply. She would smile, smooth her gown, and go about her day fully satisfied. As years passed, Snow White grew from a sweet baby into a lovely young girl, and then into a breathtakingly beautiful young woman. She was gentle, kind, and pure of heart. The servants adored her. The birds sang when she walked in the gardens. Even the flowers seemed to bloom a little brighter in her presence. One morning, the evil queen stood before her mirror as usual and asked her question. But this time, the mirror paused and then answered differently. "You, my queen, are fair, it's true, but Snow White is 1,000 times more beautiful than you." The queen's face went pale, then flushed with fury. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. From that moment forward, jealousy and hatred took root in her heart like a poisonous vine, and it grew and grew until it consumed her entirely. The evil queen summoned her royal huntsman, a large weathered man named Conrad who had served the kingdom for many years. "Take Snow White deep into the forest," she commanded, her voice as cold as iron. "And when you are far enough that no one can hear, kill her. Bring me her heart in this box as proof." She held out a small carved wooden box. The huntsman's face tightened, but he nodded obediently. The next day, he led Snow White into the great dark forest on the pretense of gathering wild flowers. They walked deeper and deeper past ancient twisted oaks and moss-covered stones that the kingdom had completely faded away. Then the huntsman stopped. He drew his long knife. Snow White turned and saw his face. She understood immediately. "Please, please," she cried, her eyes filling with tears. "Please, I beg you, spare my life. I will run away into the forest and never return. I promise the queen will never see me again." The huntsman looked at her, this innocent young girl with her dark hair and her terrified eyes, and his resolve crumbled completely. He lowered the knife. He was a father himself. He could not do it. "Run," he whispered urgently. "Run, child, and never come back. The wild animals of the forest may get you, but I cannot kill you with my own hands." Snow White didn't hesitate. She turned and ran deeper into the dark forest, branches clawing at her dress, roots tripping her feet, shadows leaping at her from every direction. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave way, and she collapsed onto the mossy ground, weeping. The huntsman, meanwhile, found a wild boar and killed it. He carried its heart back to the queen in the carved box. As the sun began to set and the forest grew darker and stranger, Snow White picked herself up and stumbled onward. Strange shapes loomed in the shadows. Owls hooted. Eyes glinted from the undergrowth. Then, through the trees, she spotted a tiny, warm light. She pushed through a thicket and found a small, perfectly neat cottage, no bigger than a gardener's shed, with a roof of mossy shingles and flower boxes beneath every miniature window. Everything about it was small. The door, the chairs, the table, the beds lined up in a row inside. Snow White peeked through the window. Empty. She tried the door. It swung open. Inside, she found 7 tiny plates on a table, 7 tiny cups, 7 tiny spoons. In the next room, 7 little beds, each with a name carved into the headboard. Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey. Exhausted beyond measure, Snow White ate a little bread from each plate, drank a sip from each cup so as not to take too much from anyone, and then curled up across 3 of the little beds and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Later that night, the 7 dwarfs came home from their day's work in the diamond mines, singing and swinging their pickaxes. When they entered the cottage, they noticed immediately that something was different. Breadcrumbs on the table, cups slightly moved. Then they found her. They gathered around in silent wonder, holding their lanterns high, gazing at the beautiful sleeping girl with hair like midnight and cheeks like roses. "Who is she?" breathed Bashful. "She's beautiful," whispered Happy. "She's trespassing," grumbled Grumpy. In the morning, Snow White woke to find 7 pairs of eyes staring at her from beside the beds. She startled, but their faces were so kind and curious that her fear quickly melted. She told them everything: the evil queen, the huntsman, her flight through the forest. Doc stroked his beard thoughtfully. "You may stay with us," he said at last, "if you'll cook and clean and keep house while we're away at the mines." Oh, yes. Snow White agreed joyfully, gladly. And so she stayed, and the cottage became a warm and happy home. Back at the castle, the evil queen stood before her mirror once more, certain of what it would tell her now that Snow White was surely dead. "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" The mirror shimmered. And then it said, "Over the hills and the woodlands so deep where 7 small dwarfs their household keep, Snow White is living, and she is still the fairest that ever did dwell." The queen's scream of rage echoed through the castle corridors. She was not finished, not even close. She retreated to her secret laboratory deep beneath the castle, where dusty shelves lined the walls and strange liquids bubbled in glass bottles. She worked by torchlight, mixing and muttering, consulting her books of dark magic. Finally, she created her masterpiece, a beautiful, glossy, perfectly red apple. On one side, it was wholesome and good. On the other side, hidden within the crimson skin, was a sleeping death potion so powerful that one single bite would send the eater into a sleep so deep it would seem like death itself. She disguised herself as a hunched old peddler woman, gray-haired, wrinkled, dressed in rags, and set off through the forest toward the little cottage. The dwarfs had warned Snow White every morning before leaving, "Do not open the door to strangers. The queen may still be searching for you." Snow White promised faithfully, but when the bent old woman appeared at her window, holding out the most beautiful apple she had ever seen, her kind heart wavered. "Beautiful apple, dearie," the old woman croaked sweetly, "fresh from my own orchard. A gift for such a pretty girl." "I'm sorry," Snow White said cautiously. "I'm not allowed to accept things from strangers." "Strangers?" The old woman laughed warmly. "Why, I'm just a harmless old granny. Look, I'll take a bite myself to show you it's safe." The old woman bit into the green side of the apple, the safe side, and smiled. "See, perfectly good. Now you try the rosy red side. It's the sweetest part of all." Snow White hesitated only a moment longer. Then she reached through the window and took the apple. She lifted it to her lips. She bit. The moment the sweet juice touched her tongue, her eyes fluttered, her hand dropped, and she fell to the floor as still and silent as if she had died. The disguised queen cackled with triumph, threw off her peddler's cloak, and fled through the forest. When the 7 dwarfs returned home that evening, they found Snow White lying on the floor, pale and motionless. They tried everything they knew: cold water, fresh air, calling her name, but nothing worked. She wouldn't wake. They wept. They wept. All 7 of them, even Grumpy, cried until their beards were wet. They could not bring themselves to put her in the cold, dark ground. Instead, they built her a coffin of glass so they could always see her face. They carried it to a gentle hillside in the forest and took turns keeping watch over it day and night. The birds came to mourn her too: an owl, a raven, a dove. There she lay, as beautiful as ever, cheeks still faintly rosy, as if she were simply sleeping. Months passed. One autumn day, a handsome prince from a neighboring kingdom was riding through the forest when he came upon the glass coffin on the hillside. He stopped his horse and stared. He had never seen anyone so beautiful in all his life. He dismounted and approached. The dwarfs watched warily as he gazed down through the glass at her still, lovely face. "Who is she?" he asked softly. They told him the whole sad story. The prince was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Please, may I just, please, May I just look at her more closely? I feel as though I have been searching for her all my life without knowing it." The dwarfs exchanged glances and nodded. The prince knelt beside the coffin and gently lifted the glass lid. He leaned forward and softly, reverently pressed his lips to Snow White's cold forehead. And then something extraordinary happened. The piece of poisoned apple dislodged from Snow White's lips. Her eyelids fluttered. Color flooded back into her cheeks. She drew a long, slow breath and opened her eyes. She looked up into the face of the young prince kneeling above her, the golden autumn light behind him, and the 7 dwarfs crowding around with their mouths hanging open in disbelief and joy. "Where am I?" she whispered. "You're safe," the prince said, smiling. "You're finally safe." Snow White learned what had happened. She said a tearful, grateful goodbye to her 7 dear friends, Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey, who had sheltered her and kept watch over her with such faithfulness. The prince took her back to his kingdom, and they were married in a grand celebration that lasted 3 days and 3 nights. As for the evil queen, when she stood before her mirror and finally heard the words, "The young queen of the neighboring realm is now the fairest of them all," she flew into such a violent rage that she smashed the mirror into 1,000 pieces, and with it, her last hold on power and beauty shattered forever. Snow White went on to rule with kindness and wisdom. She never forgot the little cottage in the forest, and every year she visited the 7 dwarfs, bringing them pies and laughter and stories of the wider world. And they all, every last one of them, lived happily ever after.